My grandmother called me the family disappointment for the first time when I was 9 years old. She said it the way you'd say, pass the salt, like it was just a fact about the world, neutral and permanent, something everyone already knew. I remember I was wearing my church dress, the yellow one with the white collar that my mother had pressed that morning, and my grandmother looked at me across her kitchen table and said it without putting down her coffee cup. I didn't cry. I remember that. I just looked at the linoleum. That was 1994, in a farmhouse outside of Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. 31 years later, I would walk into a federal building 40 miles from that same kitchen table, carrying a folder that had taken me 14 months to build, and everything my grandmother had said about me would turn out to be wrong in the most precise, documented, legally admissible way possible. My name is Renata Hale. I am 39 years old, and this is the story of what my family did and what I did about it. Welcome back to Ravage Stories, where secrets come out, betrayals get exposed, and the people who thought they'd get away with it never do. If you're new here, subscribe, join the family. You're going to want to be here for what comes next. Drop a comment where you are listening from. It means a lot to me. Now let's go. My father, Dennis Hale, grew up poor in the same way a lot of people in that part of Wisconsin grew up poor, quietly and without complaint, and with a specific kind of resourcefulness that never fully leaves you. He was a machinist for 22 years. He drove the same truck from 1989 until 2007. He kept a savings account that he never touched and a life insurance policy he renewed without fail every year because he had 2 daughters and a wife who trusted him, and he took that seriously. My mother, Lynn, was a school secretary for 30 years. She packed her lunch every day. She bought her blouses at the end of season sales. She wore the same winter coat for 11 years and didn't replace it until the zipper finally gave out, and even then she was embarrassed about spending the money. They built something modest and real, the two of them, on calloused hands and careful choices. My sister Diane is 4 years older than me. She was always beautiful in a way that got noticed first, bright and quick and comfortable in rooms where I felt like I was taking up space wrong. I loved her. For most of my childhood, I genuinely loved her the way you love someone who is woven into everything you know about home. And then there was our grandmother, Lorraine Hale, my father's mother. Lorraine had opinions the way some people have furniture, in every room, immovable, and accumulated over decades. She had favorites. She did not hide this. Diane was hers from the beginning. Diane was bright. Diane was charming. Diane had her eyes. I was, and these are words Lorraine used more than once across more than one decade, the difficult one, the one who asked too many questions, the one who didn't know when to let things go. She meant that as an insult. I have thought about it differently for a long time now. My father died in November of 2019. He was 61 years old, and it was sudden, a cardiac event, and there is no version of that sentence that ever sounds right. He had a trust, a structured revocable trust that he had set up through an estate planning attorney back in 2011, with 2 named beneficiaries, me and Diane, and a named trustee, which was Lorraine. My father trusted his mother. He was that kind of man, the kind who believed that family was a system that held. The trust held a primary account and 2 smaller CDs, plus a portion of the proceeds from his life insurance policy that flowed into it after his death. The total value at the time of his passing was approximately $260,000. My mother received the house and her own designated insurance payout under a separate policy. The trust was specifically for me and Diane, split equally, to be distributed within 18 months of his death, or upon the trustee's written determination that both beneficiaries had been properly notified and had received accounting documentation. I know all of this now. At the time, I knew only that my father had something set aside for us, and that Lorraine was handling it, and that I should be patient. Lorraine told me to be patient. She said the estate was complex. She said these things take time. She said it the way she had always spoken to me, with a particular weariness, as though my presence required management. I was working then as a paralegal for a small firm in Madison. I had been there for 6 years. I was good at my job in the specific way that people who grew up watching careful people work become good at their jobs, methodically, without drama, with attention to what the paper actually says versus what someone is telling you it says. I know how to read a trust document. I know what 18 months means. I know what beneficiary notification looks like. 18 months passed. I received nothing. No accounting, no communication from Lorraine beyond holiday cards signed with her full name, which I had always found strange, even as a child. Lorraine. Not grandma, not love, just Lorraine. I called her in the spring of 2021. She said things were still being settled. I asked for the trust account number and the name of the custodial institution. She told me I was being pushy. She used the word pushy 3 times in 6 minutes, which I noted because noting things is what I do. I called Diane. Diane told me to give it more time. She said Grandma was grieving. We were all grieving, and that I was making things harder by pressuring her. She said this gently, in the tone she had perfected over years, warm enough to sound caring, firm enough to close the conversation. I let 4 more months pass. My rent went up that fall. My car needed a timing belt. I was eating dinners that were mostly rice and beans and telling myself it was fine, that I was fine, that I was being patient the way my father would have wanted. I had a cardigan I'd been wearing since 2016 that had started pilling at both elbows, and I kept it because it was warm and I couldn't think about spending money on something I didn't absolutely need. I want you to understand what patience costs, not as a concept, as a daily practice with a number on it. In October of 2021, I drove out to Lorraine's house on a Saturday morning with a pan of banana bread because that is what my mother had taught me. You show up with something, you don't arrive empty-handed, even when you are arriving to ask a hard question. I knocked, she let me in. She did not comment on the bread. I sat across from her at the same kitchen table where she had first called me the family disappointment, and I asked her directly for a full accounting of the trust. I asked her in writing beforehand, so there was a record of the request. I had the trust document with me, printed, with the relevant sections flagged in yellow. She looked at the flagged pages, then she looked at me. Then she said that Diane had already received her portion months ago. I asked about my portion. She picked up her coffee cup, the same gesture I realized from 30 years ago, and she said that she had exercised her discretion as trustee, and that given Diane's circumstances and needs, the remaining balance had been directed to supplement what Diane had already received. I said, so clearly, because I needed to be sure I heard her correctly. So both distributions went to Diane. She said yes. Then she said that she had always believed I was resilient, that I had always landed on my feet, that I didn't need it the way Diane did, and that frankly, and I will carry this word forever, frankly, I had never really understood what this family had built or what it was worth, and she didn't feel I deserved the same consideration. She said, deserved. She laughed a little when she said it. Not a mean laugh, which would have been easier, a dismissive one, like she was explaining something obvious to someone slow. I picked up my flagged document. I put it in my bag. I said, thank you for telling me. I drove home. I did not cry until I was on the county road with no other cars visible. And then I cried for exactly the length of one song on the radio, which was a song I don't even remember now. And then I stopped. That was the clock starting. I called my mother that evening. She had known something was wrong for months. Mothers know. But she hadn't wanted to alarm me. She told me then that Diane had mentioned casually, in passing, over the summer, that she'd gotten some money from Grandma and used it for renovations on her house in Middleton. Her house. The one with the new kitchen and the composite deck that Diane had posted photographs of in June. My mother's voice was quiet on the phone, careful, the way she always got when she was trying not to say too much. She said, honey, I think you need to make some calls. I made some calls. I requested the trust records through a formal written demand, citing my rights as a named beneficiary under Wisconsin Chapter 701, which requires trustees to provide accountings and relevant documentation upon request. Lorraine did not respond. I sent a second demand via certified mail. She signed for it. Still nothing. I pulled the county property records for Diane's Middleton house, purchased in 2017, mortgage of $140,000, refinanced in 2020. Building permit filed in July 2021 for a full kitchen renovation and exterior deck construction. Combined contractor invoice, which I obtained through the permit records, totaling $47,600. I called Diane's contractor. He was polite, a little confused about why I was asking, but not suspicious. He told me the job had been paid in full, in 2 installments, both by personal check. I got the name of Lorraine's bank through a contact at the firm. I filed a request under the trust's own terms for a 5-year account history. When Lorraine refused to provide it, and she did refuse, through a letter written in her own handwriting, which was itself an error, I petitioned the probate court in Fond du Lac County for a formal accounting. This is where things began to open. The court-ordered accounting came back in February of 2022. I sat in my apartment with the folder I had started keeping in my car's back seat, just a manila folder at first, then an accordion file, then a 2-inch binder, and I went through every line. The trust had received $264,000 total at its establishment, plus an additional deposit in December 2019 of $31,000, which was the final disbursement from my father's employer-sponsored retirement supplement. Diane had received 2 disbursements from the trust. The first was $110,000 in March of 2020, 4 months after my father died. The second was $98,000 in January of 2021. That was $208,000 out of $295,000 total. My disbursement was listed in the accounting as 0. The accounting also showed something else. Between April and September of 2021, while I had been calling Lorraine and asking politely for patience, there had been 12 separate transfers from the trust account to an account held jointly by Lorraine and Diane. The transfers ranged from $4,000 to $9,000 each, small enough individually to stay below the federal reporting threshold. Together, they totaled $62,000. I sat with that for a long time. The structuring of those transfers, keeping each one below $10,000, that wasn't an accident, that was deliberate. And deliberate financial structuring to avoid federal reporting requirements has a name. It is called smurfing, technically, and it falls under 31 U.S.C. Section 5324, and it is a federal crime. My binder got a second section. I want to pause here because I need to tell you something about what this felt like. Not legally. Procedurally, I was clear. I knew what I was doing. But in the body, in the place where the daughter lives, I had spent 2 years telling myself I was being patient. I had worn a pilling cardigan and eaten beans and told myself I was fine. And sitting there with that accounting, I understood that my patience had been weaponized. Every time Lorraine told me to wait, she was buying time to move money. Every time Diane told me to give Grandma space to grieve, she knew. She knew. Diane knew. This is the thing about betrayal when it comes from family. It does not arrive loudly. It arrives in the form of someone you love saying, "Trust me, give it time, you're being too much," and you believe them because you have always believed them, because that is what love trained you to do. I called my college friend Mara, who had gone to law school while I'd gone the paralegal route, who was now a licensed attorney practicing in Milwaukee. We had dinner on a Thursday in March. I brought my binder. She ordered the soup and started reading, and about 40 minutes in, she put down her spoon and looked at me and said, "You have a trustee breach case, a conversion action, and depending on how the structuring holds up, you may have a federal referral." She took a long breath. Then she said, "Renata, she stole from you." Both of them did. Something settled in me when Mara said it out loud. Not relief exactly, more like the specific quiet that comes when the thing you already knew finally has a name. I retained Mara formally. She filed a civil action in Fond du Lac County Circuit Court for breach of fiduciary duty, conversion of trust assets, and breach of Wisconsin Chapter 701 accounting requirements. She also drafted a formal referral to the U.S. Attorney's Office, attaching the structuring analysis and the transfer records. Lorraine got served at her house on a Tuesday morning. I was not there. I did not want to be there. I found out later from someone in the family who had been watching, someone who had seen things over the years and had stayed quiet but not disappeared, that when the process server handed her the papers, Lorraine said, "She has no idea who she is dealing with," which is such a perfect thing to say when you are wrong. She had apparently been so convinced of my irrelevance for so long that she could not recalibrate. She thought I was still the 9-year-old in the yellow church dress looking at the linoleum. She was not paying attention to who I had become. Diane called me 2 days after she was served. She was crying. She said she hadn't known about the structuring, that Lorraine had handled the transfers, that she just thought it was a gift, that she would give it back, that we could work this out privately, that this would destroy the family. She said that last part 3 times. I counted because I count things. I said, "Diane, I need you to speak with your attorney before you call me again." She said, "Renata, please." I said, "Please speak with your attorney." Then I hung up. That was the hardest part of the whole thing. Not the paperwork, not the hearings, not even the accounting. That phone call, my sister crying, and knowing that sympathy in that moment was something I could not afford to spend. The civil case moved. Mara was thorough and fast, 2 qualities that in litigation matter more than almost anything else. Through discovery, we obtained Lorraine's full bank records going back 5 years. We found a third account, a money market account at a separate institution, established 6 months after my father's death, that neither the original trust accounting nor the court-ordered accounting had disclosed. That account had received $115,000 in transfers from the trust, moved in 3 large wire transfers in October and November of 2020. The account was held solely in Lorraine's name. Nothing in that account had gone to Diane. That money had simply stopped existing as far as any accounting Lorraine had ever provided was concerned. That is wire fraud. 18 U.S.C. Section 1343. That is a federal felony with a 20-year maximum exposure. The U.S. Attorney's Office was already reviewing the structuring referral. When we provided the wire transfer documentation, the case escalated. I know this because the Assistant U.S. Attorney assigned to the matter called Mara on a Friday afternoon in late September and asked for a meeting, and Mara called me immediately and said, "They're moving." The civil case settled in October of 2022. I want to be very precise about this. The settlement required Diane to return $160,000, the disbursements she received that exceeded her equal share, plus interest calculated from the date of each wrongful transfer. The court appointed a neutral receiver to liquidate the money market account and distribute the proceeds to me as the aggrieved beneficiary. Final amount recovered in the civil action, $212,000. I called my mother when the settlement was signed. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Your father would have hated all of this." I said, "I know." She said, "He also would have been so proud of you." I didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said she had something for me, and would I come home for the weekend. When I got there, she handed me a small velvet box. Inside was my father's wedding ring, which he had not worn the last years of his life because of a hand injury, but which she had kept. She had put it on a chain. She fastened the chain around my neck herself, standing in the kitchen, and neither of us said anything about what that meant, and we didn't need to. I have worn it since that day, every day since that day. The federal case moved on its own timeline, which is what federal cases do. The grand jury returned indictments against Lorraine in March of 2023. Count 1, wire fraud under Section 1343. Count 2, structuring under Section 5324. Count 3, breach of fiduciary duty, elevated under Honest Services Fraud Doctrine, 18 U.S.C. Section 1346, based on the trustee relationship and its implied obligation of loyalty and honest dealing. Diane was charged in a separate related information, not an indictment, which matters, with 1 count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, reflecting her knowledge of and participation in the disbursement scheme, mitigated by her cooperation with investigators beginning in November of 2022. Lorraine's trial lasted 4 days in the fall of 2023. I testified once, on the second morning. I wore a navy blazer. My mother was in the gallery, in the second row, and I did not look at her until I was seated and sworn, and then I did, and she nodded once. My father's ring was inside my collar. Lorraine sat at the defense table in a beige cardigan and white hair, and looked like someone's grandmother, which she was, which did not save her. The evidence was what it was. The wire transfer records, the undisclosed account, the structuring pattern, her own handwriting on a note recovered from her home office during the search that read, "D gets first, R later if anything left." If anything left. Like I was a margin, an afterthought, a condition to be managed. The jury deliberated for 11 hours, guilty on all 3 counts. Lorraine was sentenced in January of 2024. The judge, a woman in her mid-60s who had been on the bench for 18 years and who read the sentencing guidelines the way my mother read recipes, precisely, without improvisation, sentenced Lorraine to 38 months in federal custody, supervised release of 2 years, and full restitution. Restitution was calculated at $115,400, representing the wire-transferred funds in the undisclosed account, plus a fraud enhancement calculated from the date of first transfer. Diane received 36 months of probation, community service, and was ordered to complete the civil repayment as a condition of her probationary agreement. She has complied. We do not speak. I don't know if we ever will. That is its own kind of loss, separate from everything else. Sitting in a drawer I don't open very often. At sentencing, Mara was there as a courtesy. The civil case had long been closed. I was there because I had earned the right to be there. I stood in the gallery and I held my father's ring between my fingers, and I listened to the judge read the sentence, and I thought about a 9-year-old girl in a yellow church dress looking at a kitchen floor and deciding not to cry. I thought about what my grandmother had said in that kitchen in October of 2021, that I didn't deserve it, that I had never understood what the family had built or what it was worth. She was wrong about the second part, and that's what I want to leave you with. I understood exactly what my father had built. I understood it because I watched him build it. carefully, without shortcuts, from calloused hands and a machinist's wage and a savings account he never touched. I understood what it was worth because I had grown up in that same arithmetic of careful, of enough, of you take care of what you have because what you have is not guaranteed. My grandmother spent 30 years deciding that understanding made me lesser, that my questions were inconvenience, that my persistence was a character defect. She built a hierarchy in our family with Diane at the center of it, and she fed that hierarchy for decades, and she thought it was permanent. She was wrong, and the thing she did not account for, the thing people who decide someone is lesser never account for, is that the person they underestimated was paying attention the entire time, taking notes, building a folder, becoming exactly the kind of woman you do not want coming for you in a courtroom. My father's money is in an account now. I have not spent most of it. Part of it went to pay off a debt that had been following me for years. Part of it went to my mother, informally, as a gift she accepted after significant argument and one very long phone call. The rest is in a high-yield account, and it sits there like a fact, like a document, like proof of something. I have a new cardigan. It is charcoal gray and well-made, and I did not buy it on sale. I bought it because I wanted it, and I could, and that is a sentence I am still learning how to say. What I would tell you, if you are the person in this story who has not yet gotten to the folder stage, and I think some of you know exactly what I mean by that, is this. Grief makes us patient in ways that other people will use against us if they are that kind of people. Patience is not the same as permission. You can grieve and still demand an accounting. You can love someone and still make them answer for what they did. You can be the quiet daughter and still walk into a federal building with documentation that makes it very clear who understood what this family built and what it was worth. Know your rights as a beneficiary. Demand a written accounting, formally, and put it in writing when you demand it. Understand that a trustee's discretion is not unlimited. It is bounded by fiduciary duty, and fiduciary duty is enforceable. Know that structuring transactions to avoid federal reporting thresholds is itself a federal crime, regardless of whether the underlying funds were obtained legally. Know that honest services fraud extends to private fiduciary relationships when a trustee deliberately deceives a beneficiary. Know that wire transfers leave records, and records are patient, and they wait exactly as long as you need them to. And know that the folder you start in the trunk of your car, the one that feels small and uncertain and maybe like nothing, that folder can become the thing that changes everything. You just have to keep adding to it. To my father, who built something real and trusted the wrong person to protect it, I protected it for him. I hope that counts. My grandmother called me the family disappointment for the first time when I was 9 years old. She said it without putting down her coffee cup. She was in federal custody before that cup was cold in the scheme of things. 38 months. And the woman she said would never understand what this family was worth walked out of that sentencing hearing with her father's ring warm against her chest and nothing left to prove to anyone. Now I want to ask you something. If you found out that someone you trusted with a grieving parent's legacy had been quietly moving that money for years while telling you to wait, to be patient, to give them space, what would you have done with that first moment of knowing? The moment before the folder, before the attorney, before any of it. Just the moment when you understood, finally, what had been happening all along. Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. If this story hit you somewhere real, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, share it with the person who needs to hear it. I'll see you soon.